Editor-in-Chief of Buck Institute for Education, and Suzie Boss will last about 45 minutes, and it will be archived. I'll give you the URL for that archive. You can watch it again later or tell your friends if you wish. I'm the editor at the Buck Institute. I've written some of our books and overseen the production of other books and written materials for the Buck Institute for Education. As you might know, we focus entirely on project-based learning. We're a nonprofit based in Novato, California, just north of San Francisco. And this book is now in our website's online store. So we hope you'll like it and enjoy the webinar. Suzie?
Hi, this is Suzie Boss. Very happy to join you all. I'm listed as the lead author of this book, but I have to tell you that we practiced a lot of collaboration in the writing and editing of it. So a big shout out to John Larmer and my other colleagues at the Buck Institute for Education, including my colleagues on the national faculty, of which I'm a part. Lots of great ideas from the field and from some really excellent practitioners. So great to be with you today to tell you a little about it.
Okay, and feel free to use the chat feature anytime to post a question, or if you'd like to share a resource or share an idea, you can talk to each other, talk to us. Either Suzie or myself can perhaps answer a question quickly when we're not the main speaker. And at the end, if there are more questions, we'll have time to answer those, or if there's been a certain trend or theme to the questions, we might not answer them right away in the chat, but save them for discussion at the end of the webinar. So please feel free to use the chat, post links, talk about resources, reflect on what you're hearing. We will post a question or two during the webinar for you to respond to, a little reflective question. Okay, so let's move on to the book. First of all, this webinar, as I said, is being archived. It'll be on our YouTube channel, and you can also get to it through our website at bie.org. This is the very top of the back cover of the book, which just tells you what the book is in a summary form and who it's for. So it's meant to be very practical, with a lot of practical classroom tips from teachers on how to implement project-based learning with an eye toward actually teaching and assessing those 21st century competencies, the 4 C's of critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity. It's designed for middle and high school teachers, and perhaps instructional coaches at those grade levels, and school leaders as well. There's a chapter at the end I'll be talking about for school leaders. But even upper elementary school teachers, I think, would find the book valuable. And we believe, as it says here, that no other teaching method brings together those 4 C's like project-based learning. This book is the third in our PBL Toolkit Series. So these books are the other 2 books, one for elementary grades and one for middle and high school teachers. Both of these have more of the nuts and bolts of actually designing, managing, and assessing a project. The new book, it focuses more on the 21st century competencies and not so much on the basics of project-based learning. So check out these 2 other volumes if you want more of the basic advice for designing a project. Those are also on our website. All right, here's an image of a 21st century high school. This is High Tech High in San Diego, California. If you've ever visited there, you know what a wonderful place that is. It doesn't look like a regular school, a lot of glass, a lot of student work, a lot of art hanging in the walls and from the ceiling and everywhere you look, and lots of different kinds of workspaces. And this just, I just show this picture to point out the need for a new kind of education in the 21st century. We make it clear that the old education had a lot of this too. I mean, Socrates used a lot of critical thinking skills 2,500 years ago. But now more than ever, the way the economy works in the United States today and increasingly around the world is a knowledge-based economy. People are working in teams, having to solve complex problems, use their creativity and innovation, and communicate in various ways using lots of different kinds of media. So while content is still important, the 21st century skills in today's world are vital for students to succeed, especially since they're going to be changing jobs often more than people used to and have to be kind of nimble in the way they operate in today's economy and today's world. And the 4 C's will help them be nimble. This is the table of contents for the book. As you can see, it's got 6 main chapters. The first chapter is a basic overview of what the 4 C's are and how PBL teaches them well. A nice piece of this chapter about the Common Core state standards and next generation science standards, which I'll mention in a minute. We do a lot of Common Core alignment throughout this book. Suzie will take you through the heart of the book, the 4 chapters on the 4 C's. Each one of those is constructed about the same way, with a brief introduction to the competency, what it is, why it's important today, how it's seen in the Common Core, and then a description of a sample project, which will provide an illustration of how a teacher designed a project and really developed the skills in his or her students during the project. And then the 3D approach, designing, developing, and determining. How to design projects with an eye toward that competency, to bring out that competency, how to develop students' skills in that area, and how to determine your results, the assessment piece. So that's the structure of each of the 4 chapters. At the end, chapter 6 is for school leaders, about how to build support for 21st century learning, both in your community, among parents, and also how to help establish school-wide practices, policies that help teachers, a school-wide culture in support of project-based learning and 21st century competencies. The appendix to the book has some useful stuff, as we call it, lots of rubrics for each of the 4 C's that are aligned to the Common Core for middle school and high school grade levels. There's a feature at the beginning of that describes how to use the rubrics. It's worth a read. Also, some audience feedback prompts, student reflection prompts for each of the 4 C's, and then an FAQ sheet and a research summary. At the end, there's a reading and resources list. The audience for this book, as I said, middle school and high school folks, or perhaps even somewhat upper elementary. Could be rookies, could be veterans, could be school leaders. So if you're brand new to this, as I said, you might want to check out our other books as well as this one. If you've done some project-based learning, but maybe haven't gone into depth on the 4 C's, or you haven't actually perhaps explicitly taught or even assessed them, which a lot of teachers haven't. They might say, oh, well, my projects involve a lot of collaboration and critical thinking, but they haven't actually done a lot of teaching around those, and perhaps especially not much in the way of formal assessment of those skills. So that's a major audience for this book. And PBL veterans, who may actually do a lot of that already, might find lots of advice in here and tips on how to go deeper into their practice. And I mentioned for school leaders and coaches, the last chapter will help them. All right, so the book is divided up. As I said, each chapter has advice on these 3 areas, the 3D approach: how to design a project, what kind of projects work well for bringing out those different competencies, what kind of products might you steer students toward to bring out those competencies, how do you develop skills in students, how do you help them understand what the competencies mean, how to apply them to their project work, and finally, how do you determine if students have become more proficient at applying the 4 C's and reflect on what they've learned. So that 3D approach you'll see throughout the book. Some special features scattered throughout the book also. There's a classroom look for box where you'll see some questions you might ask either yourself as a teacher or an administrator or a colleague who visits your classroom might ask these questions to see evidence that students are engaged in one of the 4 C's. You'll see tips from the classroom with some ideas from experienced teachers, little tips for various 4 C's. Bulletin board examples are things that are more extensive resources or discussions of particular topics. And tech tips for each of the 4 C's are scattered throughout also. Some people think of technology as a 21st century competency, and it certainly is necessary in today's world. We have decided to sort of fold it into the other 4 C's. It's a tool for helping you develop the other 4 C's, not to mention, of course, doing project tasks. So technology is important and scattered throughout, but it's not brought out as a competency in and of itself in our book. A quick word here about why we're calling 21st century competencies and not the more widely known 21st century skills. I just did a quick search here and pasted in some headlines. I searched 21st century skills fad, and this is what I got. So there is talk in mainstream press as well as the education world that 21st century skills is a piece of jargon, it's a trendy term, and it may be getting a little old or a little bit, one of those pieces of jargon you don't want to overuse. And moreover, though, the main reason we think that the competencies of critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity and innovation are really not just simple skills. They're more complex than that. They might involve several skills. I think it's more accurate to say someone is a competent critical thinker than they have good critical thinking skills. That seemed to break it down too much. So anyway, competency is what we went with in this book, and we think it captures those that learning better than just the word skills, not to mention avoiding the trendiness issue. A quick word, I mentioned this already before, but in project-based learning, you often get the comment, and when you discuss 21st century competencies or skills, certainly, some people say, well, but it's just fluffy stuff, right? Projects don't really teach content. Students still have to learn history and math and science and read novels, don't they? And we say, yes, of course, that's very important. And project-based learning done well, that's the key, done well, done rigorously, should include both. There are two tracks that lead to the same goal, high-quality education for every student. So they go hand in hand. You can design projects that have rich, deep content, as well as projects that teach and assess 21st century competencies with the right tools and skills and management by the teacher. All right, the first chapter talks about why these competencies are important today for college, careers, and life. So we talk a lot about how today's economy, life in a democracy in the 21st century, in our media-saturated world, in college, more and more students need problem-solving, thinking skills to be innovative thinkers, good communicators, and so forth. We have some research features scattered throughout the book, and here's a little more in-depth piece on research on 21st century readiness and how project-based learning builds those skills and is successful in all different kinds of settings. There's a lot more research on our website, and I mentioned before that research summary at the end of the book might be very useful for school leaders or other people who are concerned about the research behind project-based learning in 21st century competencies. Note that last bullet, by the way. PBL has also been shown to be successful in closing the achievement gap for low-income students, English learners, African-American, Hispanic students, and so forth. That's a good finding. I mentioned before the Common Core state standards really do emphasize a lot of the same things you see in project-based learning. The four C's are throughout there. They aren't called out as their own special section, but if you look for critical thinking, for example, if you search the term analyze in Common Core, you get dozens and dozens of places where the term is mentioned, or evaluate, or compare and contrast, and so forth. The idea of argumentative writing from evidence involves critical thinking. At all grade levels, even in the elementary grades, you see lots of times where critical thinking is called for in the Common Core. In terms of collaboration, the Common Core does mention that in terms of doing research projects together, in terms of collaborating in groups, having collegial discussions are in the English language arts standards. There are a lot of tasks where students need to collaborate on real-world projects, talking to people outside of school, involving communication skills there, using media to make presentations, using their writing skills to communicate to a variety of audiences. So Common Core even has a little bit about creativity in there. There's a couple of explicit mentions of creativity, and a lot of the products students would create in meeting Common Core standards, a lot of their written products, their research work, designing experiments, solving real-world problems in math, that's mentioned a lot. A lot of that requires creativity, innovation, and the other four C's. Next generation science standards also, I should mention, really lend themselves to project-based learning and the four C's. A lot of emphasis there on solving real-world problems, like it also has in mathematics. Engineering kinds of standards are in the next generation, which involve creativity and innovation, communicating results of your of experiments you've done, of research you've done, communicating results, communicating mathematical understanding to other people, other audiences. So communication is all over the Common Core and the Next Generation Science as well in that respect. So we think it's a great way for schools to help meet the Common Core, teach the 4 C's through PBL. The Common Core mentions these things also. There's a lot of emphasis on inquiry. Actually explicitly says there should be focused research projects based on student-generated questions, which sounds just like PBL to us. A lot of informational text, nonfiction text is emphasized, especially in the upper grades, and project-based learning is full of that kind of reading. I mentioned critical thinking already and problem solving. So, now Suzie will take it away for discussing each of the 4 chapters, beginning with critical thinking in PBL.
Great, thanks, John. Yeah, that was great setup. So let's dive into these 4 C's and tackle them one by one, starting with critical thinking, which I noticed in the comments a couple of you pointed out as being one of the most challenging of the 4 C's for your students. So we all know that critical thinking is, critically important. I don't think anyone would argue with that. Employers put critical thinking right at the top of the list of attributes that they value most in their new hires and their future hires. But the big question here is, how do we know whether students are thinking critically, and how can we help them make critical thinking a habit that they get better at with practice? So we kind of take a developmental approach of building these competencies over time and helping students develop the habits of mind that go with critical thinking. And we get pretty specific in this chapter about ways to do that. We know that in PBL, when students focus on problem solving, they're having to make informed judgments, choose from an array of possible solutions. That's a form of critical thinking. And so is evaluating information, making arguments, even defining which problems are worth solving at all. All of that happens in, well-designed, high-quality projects. So what does this look like in practice? Whoops. What did I just do there, John? I'm seeing a different display on my screen, John.
I'm not sure what that is. Let's see if we can get rid of that. Oh, there we go.
I think we got rid of it. Okay, sorry. Okay, there we go. I just hit the wrong button. I was a little bit off there. So here's some examples. Each chapter talks you through a project example where a teacher has been very deliberate about emphasizing the teaching and learning of this particular C, in this case, critical thinking. So this example is from a project from Envision Schools, high school network in the San Francisco area, and it's a project called the Campaign Ad Project, where high school students were asked to make persuasive arguments about a current ballot issue. So it was very relevant, contemporary, and as you can see in this project overview, if you notice the boldface type, the teacher, Abby Benedetto, pointed out critical thinking opportunities and challenges throughout the project. Those are we've bolded those just to kind of help them stand out. You can see that critical thinking is a key aspect throughout this project. At the same time, of course, the project emphasizes important academic content in U.S. history, government, and English. But in the course of learning that academic content, students are also thinking critically and having to show evidence that they are applying their critical thinking competencies. And here you see them at the end of the project answering the driving question, what does it take to tip a voter's mind? With their public presentations, which were intended to do exactly that, to bring together voters and inform them about pros and cons of different ballot issues. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit more of this chapter to give you a sample of what you'll find kind of throughout the book. We take a look for each of the C's at this alignment between the C, in this case the critical thinking, and the Common Core. So what specifically does the Common Core have to say about critical thinking? We've done some of that searching that John's referenced and highlighted it specifically related to the key standards, and you'll see this feature in each chapter. So if you want to find out, how does this project help me address the Common Core, here's some ways to be very concrete about that. We also offer classroom look-fors, as we call them, where if you were visiting a classroom, let's say you're visiting a colleague's classroom, or you're an instructional leader doing classroom walkthroughs, or maybe you're reflecting on your own practice, and you want to find out, are students in this context, in this project, thinking critically? How would I know? How would I find out? So here's some indicators, different things that you should be seeing over time if you're visiting classrooms where critical thinking is emphasized. Again, you'll find these look-fors in each chapter to kind of help elevate these indicators and get them more kind of in the front of your awareness and help you communicate them to students as well. And each chapter also includes some research highlights. We want to help you inform your practice with what we're learning on the research side about the 4 C's and about project-based learning and what makes it effective. So you'll find some spotlights like these throughout the book. And generally you'll find that the more teachers are aware and focused deliberately on these 4 C's and the best practices in PBL, the further along students are going to get in developing these competencies. It just kind of makes sense that if you're deliberate about it, if you put the time and energy into focusing these competencies, things are going to happen. The right things are going to happen. So we're going to help you be more specific about that. John talked about the 3D approach, and here you see an example of the design stage. As you're designing a project and you want to emphasize critical thinking, what sorts of projects are going to help you do that, help you get to that end that you're aiming for? And so we give you some examples of different kinds of projects that really emphasize critical thinking and the kinds of driving questions that would cause students to have to engage their critical faculties to arrive at a solution or a product. So you see a few examples here from different content areas and a few more here. I'll give you just a moment to take a look at these. You can see that they come from social studies, they come from community problem solving, all kinds of different contexts where critical thinking is going to be critically important. So we move on to collaboration. And we know that in PBL, you tend to put students into teams, situations that require authentic teamwork. In this chapter, we really focus on why collaboration is such an asset, why it's so important, that we don't put students in teams just on a whim, that there's a real purpose behind doing that. And in this chapter, we also tackle some of the key challenges that are likely to come up as students kind of grow into this role of being an effective collaborator, starting with the question they often ask, why teams? Why do I have to work in a team? So we tackle that sort of question and try to make it very apparent why helping students have some scaffolded practice with teamwork helps them become the kind of folks who can accomplish great work together and get to better results than they could accomplish any other way through the power of collaboration. And again, we've got a project example to kind of show you what that looks like. In this case, a school in Howe, Oklahoma, decided that school-wide they needed to get better at their collaborative abilities. They wanted to build their collaboration chops. And so they tackled a school-wide project that put collaboration front and center. Teachers and students had to collaborate to make this project go. And as a result, they really changed the school culture and made teamwork a much bigger part of both teaching and learning. Student teams were asked an authentic challenge, how would you make our school better? And they had to come together in teams, come up with creative ideas, pitch their ideas, and there was actually some real cash at the end so that projects could be implemented. And I'm seeing in the columns or in the comments that one of our commenters and one of our national faculty members, Talena, was an online mentor for this project. So it had that sort of real-world collaboration with experts as well as with folks right in the building. So there's an example of a project, and we kind of take a look at that in detail to show you how collaboration unfolded throughout that project and how it was scaffolded. Here's one of the student teams early in the process where they were very focused about developing a collaborative culture. They didn't assume that students would go off and be great team members right off the bat, particularly students from different classes, different grade levels that they deliberately mixed up. They did some real team building and culture building to introduce some of these collaborative abilities that students then own and use over and over again as they go forward. So, sometimes questions come up about collaboration, and we just went ahead and tackled some of the hard ones. When you have students or teacher or students or parents who say, why do we have to do this as a team? Why can't my child just work alone? We went ahead and offered some suggestions to help you explain that and really be clear about why collaboration is so important and why there's really no other way to help students develop this capacity than to put them in teams and have them get some practice. We've also offered some suggestions about helping your English language learner students collaborate effectively. Throughout the book, we've included strategies where they make sense on the EL side of things. We've drawn on some of our in-house experts and our national faculty who have expertise in this area and have just incorporated a lot of really practical suggestions. We'll talk a little bit more about those in the communications chapter 2, but I just wanted to point out that that's a feature of the book that we think is really important. And John also mentioned that one of the D's is about determining, did this C, indeed, did students truly get better at it? Did their collaborative skills, their collaborative competencies improve? And so we offer some suggestions for determining, in other words, assessing what happened and how do we know what happened? What's the evidence? And also, as John mentioned, we've embedded technology tools where they make sense rather than treating them as something, separate or a separate competency. So we offer in each chapter some technology tools that really help to develop and support whatever the C is that we're focusing on. So here you see some examples of tools for fostering collaboration. Okay, so let's move on to communication. It's hard to even imagine a project that doesn't involve communication, right? But at the same time, how do you know if communication is effective? That not just at the end of the project when students are presenting their products or their culminating event, but throughout the project. Is there active listening going on? Are students able to communicate with experts and with each other? Can they advocate for their ideas in a team process, which sounds like collaboration and is a close cousin to collaboration, but it's this communication piece that's part of collaboration. So we kind of try to tease these apart a little bit so that we can get really specific about what does that mean and what does it look like and how do you do it well. So again, a project example kind of helps paint the picture of what this looks like. This is a project from a teacher named Nicole Lentino in the Bronx, her middle school students. They took on the role of entrepreneur in their community, and their challenge was to come up with an idea, pitch a business idea that would enhance their own local community, very much about their own neighborhood. She had some great reasons for wanting to do this because most of her students didn't know anyone who was a business owner. And she wanted them to see that this was a possibility, something that they could aspire to. So it's a great authentic purpose behind the project, but to make it really go, to make it really work, students had to be effective communicators. So here you see a student on the Expo Day, the culminating event, where he's pitching his idea to some local and quite capable business people who were kind of peppering him with some tough questions. So he has to be able to think on his feet and respond to their questions and really apply all of the communication abilities that he's mastered throughout this project. And, we know that this kind of learning can be challenging for students who are new to English if it's not their first language. But we also know that the opportunities for students to make gains by using their language skills for speaking and listening, doing a lot more talking in English, those opportunities are just vast in PBL because students are in that sort of peer group rather than just kind of sitting and listening to a lecture. They have much more, many more opportunities to use their speaking and listening skills and in the process develop their English proficiency. So we've highlighted some communication strategies to really help scaffold the learning for your EL students and build their confidence as communicators. And so there are some specific strategies, and then we also include an example of a project from an EL classroom where I believe the students tackled an issue at their local library to improve access to the Spanish language materials for their community. So it was a very authentic purpose, and they wound up having to present to the library board and argue for kind of a remodeling of, reorganizing of the library materials and translating some of those indexing resources, but a great example of communication skills being kind of put to a very important purpose. And in each chapter, you're going to find an infographic. So here's a sample of one. What we want to show you is that there are opportunities to build these 4 Cs throughout the phases of a project. So this is the top half of the infographic. They're kind of big 2-page spreads. And we drill into the details here. So we talk about, when you're launching the project, what are the communication opportunities right there? And in many cases, those opportunities connect to the Common Core. So when there is alignment, we go ahead and include that, the reference to the Common Core there. So you'll see the launching the project, the next phase of building knowledge, skills, developing and revising and kind of iterating on project design, improving one's work through feedback, and finally presenting projects. So these 4 phases are offered for each of the 4 Cs with some really specific details on what are the opportunities at each phase of the project to emphasize a particular C of the 4 Cs. So you're seeing, I hope, that we don't just kind of leave this to chance, that we want you to be really deliberate about looking for these opportunities throughout the project and figuring out, which ones are going to be the most beneficial for my students. What do I really want to emphasize, and where is it going to be important? So finally, let's come to creativity, certainly last but certainly not least. In fact, it may be my favorite of the Cs. But you'll see in this chapter that we address creativity and innovation together. And we talk about why both of these competencies are very well worth developing in your students. And we talk a little bit about the differences. I won't go into details now. That could be a whole nother conversation, which would be great. But for now, let's just emphasize that we know you can't force creativity, but you can design situations that allow for creative thinking to emerge. And you can certainly nurture and encourage creativity and innovation. And PBL offers an ideal context to teach students the processes that innovators use when they're trying to understand problems from different perspectives, generate multiple solutions, improve on ideas through a very deliberate process of prototyping and review and improvement, and getting others excited about innovative ideas through communicating and presenting them to audiences. So again, at all phases, there are ways that you can enhance student skills, build their confidence, and help them see that the creative spark can be nurtured and encouraged, and that everyone has this potential to think creatively and to think in the way that innovators do. So again, a project example helps tell the story. This one is in a science class, science and math class, which you may not necessarily think of as being the place for creativity, but it certainly is if you think more broadly about creativity and innovation and problem solving. In this example, a terrific teacher from Tech Valley High in New York named Leah Penniman wanted her students to think creatively about improving the design of solar ovens. Now these are kind of small, inexpensive ovens that were going to be used in rural Haiti by a nonprofit organization. And it would allow villagers to heat water and in a more fuel-efficient way. But it's a situation where the existing designs weren't perfect for the need. They could be improved upon. And the nonprofit came to her students as problem solvers and said, can you help us with this? Can you come up with some new designs? And she imposed some design constraints in terms of the kind of materials that could be used, the cost limits, in very real-world constraints, just as innovators and engineers face in their work. Lots of times, creative ideas, you don't get to just go for blue sky thinking, you have to have practical thinking. So creativity within constraints is something that we talk about. And throughout the project, she had engineers consulting with students as content experts and people to give feedback and to help them through this prototyping and process of improving their work through iterative design. So a great example of what creativity can look like. And again, at the design stage, to spark your own creativity, we've offered you lots of suggestions for the kinds of projects that get to creativity and innovation. Of course, some are coming from the design side of the world, and we have design and invention challenges. But we're going to also help you think about problem solving, ways to integrate the arts, other ways to come at creativity and emphasize it really deliberately in your project so that students have opportunities again and again to see themselves as creative thinkers. And I want to point out that it takes work, particularly for some students who don't think of themselves as necessarily creative. They may need some encouragement along these lines. This is something we hear from our experts in the world outside of school, that creative confidence isn't always there when students leave the traditional school system. So we offer lots of scaffolding to help jumpstart their creativity, take it further. Even something that we take for granted like brainstorming, you can really improve upon by being more deliberate about the processes that you use, the ways you help students think about brainstorming, and improving upon each other's ideas. So lots of scaffolding suggestions there for you. And I think now I'm going to turn this back over to John to talk about the last chapter.
Okay, thanks, Suzie. I'll talk about the last chapter for school leaders, instructional coaches, school site leaders, perhaps principals, vice principals, as well as district administrators and other education leaders, as well as, of course, teacher leaders at their school might find a lot of this chapter helpful. So we talk about how, because PBL is a new approach in many communities, you might need to do some public relations work, talk about what it means to teach in this way, because it's different from the way parents went to school, even though they might have been learning communication and critical thinking and had a team assignment or two. There was not so much explicit focus on the 4 C's, certainly back in the day when they went to school. So some things you'll find in this chapter. This is a handy bulletin board top 10 list for offering parents or other stakeholders of the community who might not be educators some reasons why teaching PBL, 21st century competencies via PBL, is a good idea. Those range from the slightly frivolous, like you'll have interesting things to say when your kids ask, what did you do in school today? And when you ask, rather, what you did in school today. To more serious answers, like the top one, it really does prepare graduates for college and careers. Number 3 there, as you see, reinforces the point that test scores are not harmed and perhaps are even helped when you do PBL correctly. You can see the research on that. I should say also Common Core tests, the new assessments coming down the road are definitely going to require critical thinking, communication skills, and so forth. Here's a tip to engage your students as ambassadors. They often tell the best stories about how they've benefited from a project-based learning approach and how they're learning 21st century competencies. They can make presentations, put things on your school website, share their work with audiences, and so forth. Here's an example of a grade sheet that actually explicitly pulls out some of the 4 C's. This is from the Napa New Tech Network. This shows, as well as content, which as you can see gets quite a bit of weight, but also the work ethic, collaboration skills, communication skills, and oral communication skills, and so forth. So New Tech actually does grade those separately and report them separately to parents. So students and parents really get a clear picture of what their aggregate grade means. And you can see more information about that at the New Tech, through New Tech. And other districts now are beginning to at least assess the 4 C's. Reporting them on grades is still a ways off, but I think it's going to be a coming thing in the next couple of years. Here's some ideas for administrators and our school leaders about how to support 21st 21st century learning through curriculum mapping, having teachers use common assessments or the common rubrics perhaps for the 4 Cs, which I'll show you in a second, having professional learning communities talk about their project work in terms of the 4 Cs, having common sets of materials for parents, community members to see what the school is doing in terms of teaching the 4 Cs. In the appendix I mentioned before are some useful tools. Here's some examples of the rubrics. It's our critical thinking rubric for PBL. I should say it's for PBL in particular, not critical thinking in general. So we aligned this to the 4 typical phases of a project, where you launch the project, you build understanding, knowledge, and skills, then students develop their ideas, their products, their answers to the driving question, and finally they present their answer to the driving question, their products, to an audience of some sort or some kind of public display. So throughout those 4 phases, there are opportunities to develop critical thinking in students. So this shows Common Core alignment for the below approaching an at standard level. At standard is where the Common Core is cited. And the above standard column, as you'll see in our how to use this rubric notes that precedes this in the book. These are all on our website too, by the way, free for downloading. The above standard column is left blank because it's hard to describe that. Believe me, we've tried. I wrote these rubrics, and it's hard to sort of imagine sometimes what a student might do, but you know it when you see it. That's what we decided, that when students really go above a standard, it might be very clear to you, and you can describe it then, but to try and describe it in advance is tricky. You wind up using a lot of words like exceptionally, unusually, amazing, which aren't very clear. They're not very specific. So anyway, that above standard column is there to check, but not actually pre-filled out. You can fill it out yourself when you see it. So the other rubrics is a collaboration rubric. This goes for grades 6 through 12. We also have on our website for lower elementary grades and even K2 grades, we have rubrics for this. As well as presentation rubrics, we have those throughout the grade levels on our site. This is the one for grades 6 to 8, which appears in the book, along with the high school grades rubric that appears in the book. And finally, creativity and innovation rubric for PBL. Also some Common Core alignment on this one, as you can tell, and it's also broken down by the 4 phases of a project. We provide some reflection prompts if you want to ask students to reflect in a project journal, during the project, at the end of a project, with their team perhaps. How did you show critical thinking? Give me some examples. Trace your problem solving during this project. Give me an example when you're being creative, when you're a good collaborator, when you had to communicate to a particular audience. So lots of different prompts are provided. And I mentioned already, this webinar will be archived on our YouTube channel and on our website. You can get to it there at bie.org. And Suzie just typed in a final reflection. If you'd like to offer your thoughts on any new ways you're now thinking about the 4 Cs in PBL, please send us the word. And you can order this book, as I said, through our website. The shipping does take a lot. Sorry, Jane in Hawaii. It is available on Amazon, though, yes. Our website, we sort of steer people toward. This is our website. You can see more of our stuff, but it is on it's going to be on Amazon. It's not there yet. It may take me a week or 2 to get it on Amazon. There's the page from our website, which shows where you can order the book. It's $32.95 plus shipping and tax. And we do ship right away. So we have a very fast shipping system. And as I mentioned, the other books are on there too. Our elementary grades how-to book for PBL and the PBL starter kit for middle school and high school teachers, as well as our older book, the Project-Based Learning Handbook, which has also been translated now into about 7 languages. There's a Spanish edition available on our website. If you're interested in other languages, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, we have access to those also from around the world. All right, so that's all for the webinar for now. Any final questions or final reflections? We'll end soon. Oh, a question from Randall. Do you know if Smarter Balance and Park will assess creativity? You know, I'm not sure if it'll be explicitly assessed. I don't think so. We're learning more about that right now with some folks at Stanford who are helping develop the performance assessments for Smarter Balance. They're certainly going to have tasks where students have to solve problems which will require some creative thinking and problem solving and innovative thinking strategies. Definitely critical thinking, of course. All right. Any other questions? Any other concerns?
You folks are typing.
Well, here, some people are still typing. Okay. And we hope you'll tell people about the book and tell people about this webinar if they want to watch it themselves, or they can also download the introduction for free from our website. You can take a look. It's about a 6-page introduction to the book, which will give you a good preview. And Amazon, once we have it on there, will have that look inside the book feature you can check out.
And Levi has a good question about, you know, how long does it take to go from not doing PBL to doing PBL? And I guess the answer there is it depends. But for many teachers, trying their first project, you know, getting your feet wet will put you in that space of you'll learn something from it. You'll go through the process of thinking about what worked, what do I want to improve on. You'll do the iterative thinking and prototyping and designing that you know you want your students to do. And we tend to see teachers who get their feet wet want to do another project right away. Would you agree, John?
Yeah, it takes, I mean, for a whole school to get really good at it and doing it regularly takes 2 or 3 years of intensive effort. But for one teacher, you could plan a project or two in the summer. It might take a week to plan a project, soup to nuts. And we often advise to start slow, you know, try one per semester, and then as you get the hang of it, you'll want to do more. Your students will want more. It'll be easier to plan the next one. If you can be collaborative about it and go across a grade level, across a subject area, and share projects, that saves a lot of the planning time. And you can compare notes and team teach and teach the same project. So again, though, it takes probably 2 to 3 years to become good at project-based learning. The first couple of times you're going to find you'll be on a steep learning curve, but I think you'll find it well worth it.
I'm not seeing any other final questions here.
Okay. Well, if there are no final questions, then we thank you for joining our webinar today, and we'll see you out there on the PBL trail, we hope. The Buck Institute does lots of workshops. You can give us a call or shoot us an email for workshops we do around the country and increasingly around the world. And check out our website's other features besides the books, like our PBLU online learning system, our video collection, our project search tool, to find lots of ideas about project-based learning. We wish you well. Mahalo nui to you too, Jane.
We were with you, Jane. Hope things are well in Hawaii.
Thank you. And thank you, Suzie, for writing a great book. It was really a fantastic job. A pleasure working with you, Suzie.
Well, back at you, John. As I said, this was a great exercise in collaboration and sometimes problem solving as well. So we thought critically. Right. And here's the result. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye.